Thank you,
Well received.
last
Go ahead.
Count Collier. I didn't, Minister, it's just for your own benefit, I didn't want to start unless you were here, so we asked for a couple of minutes suspension. And I just want to put on record my appreciation for you being here, because I suspect it will be an issue that you're very much interested in. I know certainly your party colleague, Philip Bratton, Brian, when he's here, will be as well. I see you've got David Polly there, at least one of your officials, who had you probably very well briefed on the housing statistics. But just to say that, particularly when it comes to North Belfast, we're normally within the top 3 or the top 4 of housing stress. And I think the concern for us all is that, as well as housing supply, there are many, many different issues, but it's certainly getting enough land to build houses where houses are needed. I also want to say from the very start that every part of the constituency needs homes. So it's not just a constituency that I represent, live in or whatever, it's accepted that need is everywhere. But I think even my colleagues from North Belfast will appreciate there are stubborn parts within North Belfast that haven't meaningfully shifted. And that's something that I hope that we take a collegiate approach to. I think one of the issues that has exercised a lot of everybody, and I picked this up across all parties, well certainly most of the parties, but not all, in Belfast City Council, was the emergence of many student accommodation blocks. So initially when we asked, for example, Ulster University, Queen's University, less so Queen's but more so Ulster, what the particular need for the student beds within the city centre, they told us 1,500. Those figures have gone up to 15,000. And the reason I know that is because I attended, and I just want to put this in the record, a planning appeals against a student managed accommodation in Union Street, and they were the figures that were put on the record. So any available land that was earmarked under different housing strategies, particularly around that area, there was not only a perception, but there was a belief that it was included in from one housing strategy to another for potential social housing. In fact, I remember when I was Minister at Carál that we were looking at land behind the Central Library to run contiguous. And the thing that we wanted to do was to use the public land for public housing approach, where we could try and bring different pockets of land together and try and get housing. Now it wasn't achieved, certainly with DCAL, but it certainly was in terms of Plot 8, which is DFC's, and the Belfast City Council piece of land in that area, which is now the strategic site assessment. But the context is that any bit of land that could be used for development, when there's a need for older people's housing, for folds, for different things, it's gobbled up by private developers. So I suppose what we're asking for is that the department, along with the housing executive, but under your leadership in the department, to be the advocate for housing need right across our part of the constituency. You've probably seen the figures because I asked the questions. But certainly for North Belfast, there are something around 4,400 or over 4,400 applicants on the housing waiting list. And these figures are from 22 to 23. 3,479 are deemed as living in housing stress. Yet the estimate is there's just been 655 homes built. And ironically, and disappointingly, they're not always in the areas of the constituencies that we represent. So we're glad that those houses are built. We're just saying they're not enough, and they're certainly not in the areas where the greatest demand is. I want to talk about also in relation to housing in North Belfast, and again, I know colleagues have experienced this across the piece, that before you would have had the potential of a supply coming from the private rented sector. That's not the case anymore. In fact, I dealt with a constituent last Friday who's paying almost £900 a month and she's working in the Mater Hospital for accommodation in North Belfast. She's having to leave. She was successful in getting accommodation elsewhere, but because she's She considers herself a member of the Catholic community, and her kids go to secondary school. The affordable property was in an area where children would not go to Catholic post-primary schools, and she's concerned. And it's not to say that people are deliberately setting out. She's around grown-up teenagers, and she's just concerned. You know what the difference is? £450 a month in rent. So there's lots of reasons why the supply hasn't been maintained. Some landlords, just can't afford. It was a family home, they're selling it on. Others, it's just not the market for them. But the thing that I wanted to raise was, I also have spoken to, I think, every single housing association about have they approached the department, or particularly the housing executive. Do they have land? Can they go into even joint ventures with other housing associations around the provision of social housing in North Belfast? Now, like everything, you get a lot of housing, so you get a lot of anybody in one room. They have a list of demands. But I think the issue for us is, and the opportunity for us is, can we explore the local development plans coming from the councils? I know it's going to be the biggest change in planning policy for probably a generation, but there may be opportunities through that. I know there was limits put on in terms of percentages of people, if they're buying a home, the percentages of those homes could be social and vice versa. However, I do think there's opportunities that both private developers and housing associations can do under the LDP. I know that the councils don't have development powers. The development powers were removed over 50 years ago, but I would like the department to explore what can be done with local government, with all those equality protections that are there with the Common Selection Scheme. Because I think, like, to be frank, we're running out of land and road in North Belfast, and we're now seeing, I know there's 3 and 4 generations now living under one roof, and it's horrible. It's horrible for the kids, and it's horrible for the families. I also know that housing associations are telling me, and I know your officials will say something different. It's not that they're disagreeable, that I've had this out with them and they disagree, but the whole amendment of the Article 15 of the Housing Order that prevents, according to housing associations, building homes for sale. Because what they're saying is, if they could build homes for sale within their envelope of providing social houses, then they could put that back in, and that could be used for a bigger pot. Some can borrow additional money, but it all comes back to a lack of land. So even if they had the money, they're not getting enough land, so we may need to look at vesting. So I would ask the Minister and his officials to even not so much look at, because vesting is always a last resort, but have discussions with local government, have discussions with people like the Harbour Commission, have discussions with even local government in Belfast and Adjournment, Newton Abbey and others that are on the outskirts of North Belfast to see what else we can do. I also want to ask, because I did put it in, and again I'll declare an interest, the housing statement that I brought forward in November 2020. And we looked at potentially ring fencing areas of highest need. And that was to try and build homes to reduce it. It's not an artificial way, it actually worked. It was removed by the SDLP in 2010 and 2011. And I also want to try and look at, if you can, just different ways that we can try and relieve. It may mean a summit, it may mean pulling everybody, the best brains together to look at what we can do. But what I don't want is for people to be trotting up to the courts, getting in and trying to get judicial reviews about why they're on the housing waiting list 4 years. They would be perfectly legally entitled to do that. But if we're all going as an executive to say, I hear what you're saying, but there's nothing we can do, I don't think that's anything that any of us want in our watch. So I'll just leave it there. So, Gormagov.
Thank you for opening the debate. All other speakers will now have 7 minutes, and I call Philip Brett.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and can I pay tribute to the member for bringing forward this important debate. I know, like me and all colleagues who represent North Belfast housing, is something that is very close to our hearts. I just think it's worth putting on the record, Mr Deputy Speaker, the lack of turnout from certain political quarters who no doubt will be on Facebook at other times saying how they're fighting the cause and their representatives are fighting the cause for housing in North Belfast, but when they have the opportunity in this House to stand up and fight for the people that elected us, their absence is notable, but Facebook seems to be the way they go rather than fighting for the representatives in this place. Mr Deputy Speaker, in May 2022, I unashamedly stood for election in North Belfast on the slogan of building back North Belfast, of ending the years of dereliction and of demolition and of rebuilding, regenerating and once again regrowing that proud community. What we have seen in recent months is to be welcomed. We have a record number of new social housing schemes either on site or now on programme, but that cannot be the simple limit of our ambition. And what it must be, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the baseline of what all representatives for North Belfast want to see: the access to good quality, affordable housing for every single person, regardless of what community they live in North Belfast. My office, like every other office I'm sure in North Belfast, is inundated on a day and daily basis with families who are at their wits' end. We have children forced to live in living rooms on their grandparents' sofas. We have 3-4 generations in one house. And most disgracefully, we have communities and families being exploited by ruthless landlords. As the member Carál Ní Chuilín made very clear, we have some absolutely disgraceful private landlord conditions across North Belfast, but it's the only option in which families have. They then fear reporting these to Council for Environmental Health Improvements because they know what will happen is they'll simply get their eviction notice and another family will be moved into that and they'll have nowhere for their family to go. What is the daily picture in my office, as I said, is families, 3-4 generations living in one household, people in rental accommodations that are beyond unacceptable. And unfortunately, when people come to our offices, particularly single males, we have to simply say to them, you have no chance of getting a social house allocated to you in North Belfast. And that's just simply not, as elected representatives, what we want to say to our people. But what we can't do is build up expectation or wrongful views. This is going to change without an intensive investment programme. And that's a simple reality that all elected representatives in North Belfast are having to tell them. Young people not having the option of staying in their homes, proud communities being broken up and people being forced to move to other parts of the city or neighbouring boroughs. So for me, the Department for Communities is the most important department in the executive, and that was why I was so delighted that our party chose that department, because the work that we can do to change lives and to change families is unparalleled. Be that in Rathcoole, Old Park, Glengormley, Leganeel, Shore Road or New Lodge, the issues faced by every single person is exactly the same. All they want to have is good quality, affordable and secure housing for their families. And as a modern society, how can we deny them those basic requirements? That is why all of us North Belfast representatives, and I think we'll all speak for one voice on this issue, is that we want to see proper investment in social and affordable housing throughout the constituency. But it would be remiss of me not to pay tribute to what I call my second family in North Belfast, and that's the North Belfast Housing Executive. I think sometimes I speak to them more times than they get to speak to their own family, but I do want to pay tribute and recognise that the Shankill office, the North Belfast office, Newton Abbey 1 and Newton Abbey 2, which all cover North Belfast, give the utmost professionalism and dedication to their jobs because they actually care about the communities in North Belfast and they want to see our people have the access to the homes that they need and deserve. I'm going to say that the thing that's shown that the housing crisis in North Belfast continues to be exacerbated is the points level on which houses are currently being allocated. I can remember when I was first elected 10 years ago in North Belfast, you could get a house at 80, 90 points. Now you're talking 200, 220, and even to get to that level is simply impossible for many people. And the only route in which people are getting to those points is through intimidation points. And what happens is those people are moving in, disrupting communities, and then we have a constant cycle. Houses are destroyed, taken out of the social housing stock for many months to be repaired, and the cycle continues. So I would hope that the Minister might be able to give some reference to his ongoing review to that issue, because the intimidation points is simply something which needs to be looked at. On a rare example, I'm going to offer the Minister some advice on how he may be able to sort out some of the housing issues in North Belfast. One, allow the Housing Executive to build land or to build houses again here in Northern Ireland. In North Belfast, they have 8 excellent sites that remain in their ownership, which if they had the ability to build themselves would go some way to meeting the housing demand in North Belfast. Continue and extend the Building Successful Communities programme, which has been a success in Lower Old Park and in the Gainsborough Mount Collier area, and other parts of North Belfast would benefit from that. And the tower block strategy should be abandoned by the Minister. How we can go about telling people that we have a housing crisis in North Belfast, but what we're going to do is knock down 50, 60 houses at one site and not be able to replace them is, in my view, not acceptable. Now, before I got elected to this place, served as a non-executive member of the board of the Housing Executive, I made it clear that that would simply exacerbate the housing crisis. And what I would hope that the Minister would continue to do is to recognise that tower blocks have an important role to play in North Belfast, and they should be invested in and made families' homes for the people of North Belfast who deserve to continue to live in their communities. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, and I now call Nuala McAllister.
Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the member Carál Ní Chuilín for bringing forward the adjournment debate and welcome the Minister to the debate this evening. This is my first adjournment debate since being elected as an MLA, so I'm really glad that it is an issue on housing in North Belfast. So I hope the Minister will forgive me if sometimes I do stray into issues that perhaps you might think unrelated to housing, but for me I do think exacerbate the issue in North Belfast. And I want to touch on some of the points that have previously already been made, rather than repeat everything again, but in terms of the student managed accommodation in North Belfast that we have seen, particularly with the migration of Ulster University into the city centre, North Belfast area, I think it is also important to note though that residents have been more content there than in other areas of Belfast in where it is student managed accommodation. So I just wanted to put on record that it is better to have that managed accommodation, but we also need to have the balance. And I think that also brings into the question that the first speaker had said around land that was previously earmarked for housing. Where we would differ on opinions is regarding the issue of shared housing. And I don't mean just shared housing in terms of different backgrounds. I mean shared housing in its totality, private, public, commercial, etc. We cannot simply continue to build housing in areas where land is the cheapest and there's nothing else around for those people that are eventually put into those houses. We need to build houses in areas that can actually become communities, and so that people can take pride in their areas. But on that, I do want to commend the work mostly of the housing associations in the last decade with regards to the building of new housing, and in particular in the Limestone Road area. The houses that were built there by Newington Housing Association were of fantastic quality, and the residents there have been exceptionally happy. And equally, it is important to note as well the Housing Executive's first time building again in North Belfast along the Ballysillin Road. It is great to see that there are houses being built again. It's just unfortunate that those are in single digits, and I don't doubt when it actually comes around to allocating those houses, it's going to be chaotic for the Housing Executive, because there's so few houses there, be yet there are going to be so many people that do deserve to have a house in that area. I also wanted to touch on the issue of reform of the actual allocation points. because I would agree that we need to reform it again to ensure that it actually is done on the fairest system. I have a family, and I don't doubt that everybody else is in the same boat, with housing being the most stressful but also the highest volume of cases within our constituency offices. But I have a family in North Belfast who have over 210 points because of the type of house that they are in need of, and with having children with special needs. They have been left over 4 years homeless, and at one point moved into temporary accommodation, which is yet another issue. The temporary accommodation is often accommodating families far outside of North Belfast. We have situations where families can no longer send children to school because their temporary accommodation is out by the airport, for example, and their schools are in inner city North Belfast. And it's not acceptable. I understand that there's not enough housing, I do, but it simply cannot go on any longer. We also need to address the issue of why people are in housing crisis, and we ultimately do need that anti-poverty strategy and to address poverty in its entirety. Another issue that was addressed by the previous speaker was about the issue of derelict buildings, and also by Carál was around the vesting issue. I think it's important that the Communities Minister also works with the ERA Minister with regard to what we do with the derelict and dilapidated buildings, because there's no doubt that the Housing Executive could use every single one of them. They could use it, they could upgrade it, and they could put families in there. So I do hope that we can also progress that issue too. With regards to the tower blocks that was previously mentioned, I was going to actually take a differing view from the previous speaker, in that I don't think that it is acceptable that families should be placed in tower blocks without that access to that community space. I agree that there needs to be a balance of what people want and what they prioritise, because we do have in North Belfast more of urban city living, but we do actually need to ensure that it is on balance like everything else. One issue that I would like to touch on that hasn't been focused is around the maintenance work of the crisis in North Belfast. Because the Housing Executive is so overwhelmed, we are now getting into a situation, and it's not just because of COVID, and it can't always be the excuse any longer, is that the maintenance of Housing Executive houses is just, it's not acceptable at the current level, and it is coming to people in their 80s who are in housing executive housings have to rely on their children going to MLA to try and get their work sped up. We're talking about people being left in the cold. We're also talking about families who are actually suffering worse with their asthma, for example, because of the mould that is growing on their housing executive properties. And we need to ensure that there is a review of all existing housing executive stock so that we can have those proper standards when it comes to damp and insulation. The maintenance backlog, I understand that the housing executive is working on it, but if there's anything else in terms of the Minister's weight with funding and allocations, so that the Housing Executive can actually speed that up, I know that families, and many of them in North Belfast, would appreciate that, because perhaps some might not find themselves in the current situation where they're actually physically unable to use rooms within their home, and they could remain within their own home then. I understand that this is an issue long before the current Minister's time, and it's going to take some time to actually assess and fix completely. But for every person on the housing waiting list, it's a person in need and a person in crisis. So I do hope that by bringing this to the Chamber today, the Minister realises that it is on the agenda and the priority of every MLA in North Belfast, and hopefully that we can progress issues in housing and anti-poverty to actually see more relief when it comes to housing in North Belfast. So thanks to the member for bringing it forward, and I look forward to the Minister's response.
Thank you. Now I call Jerry Kelly.
Thank you. I think we're going to come to agreement here, but and I don't want to go over all of this again. I think it's been very well articulated by the last three speakers, but I do want to emphasise maybe a few of those issues, because I think they have been comprehensively covered, and particularly the one around the point system. That's going to be reviewed, that there needs to be a good consultation in terms of doing that. The intimidation system, there's been attempts to try and get that changed for quite a while, because it has been abused, and abused quite massively. But just go through it. I mean, we just some emphasis. We know what the problem is. It's been described earlier on, and statistics were given. But I mean, just to give that one again, 4,409 applications. 3,479 of that is housing stress, and only 655 homes built. But let me also say that the housing executive and the work done by the housing associations, I'm not here to in any way criticise that. They've been doing good work, but what we need is to assist them in what we can do going forward. So what can be done, I suppose, is the question to yourself, Minister, and thank you for coming to listen to this. And I know that your responsibility is way beyond North Belfast, but we are talking about North Belfast here. And of course, North Belfast is in the top 4 areas of need, along with West Belfast, Newry and Mourne, and Foyle. I think it was mentioned earlier on, so forgive me if I'm repeating some of this stuff, but I think there might have been some work done in terms of public land owned by the department, maybe before you stepped into that. Maybe if you could check that, because work may have already been done on this that we can build on. But that is one of the big issues. It's how much land we have in North Belfast for the demand that we're talking about now, and how we deal with that. Council owned land as well. I think Article 15 was mentioned, but I'm looking at amending Article 15 so that it makes it easier. I mean, at the moment, I think under Belfast development plan, there's 20% social and affordable housing. I think that's way too low. If we can change that and move that up and give a bit of flexibility, a fair amount of flexibility around that, it could make a big difference to what we're dealing with here. And I agree, of course, that there are it's housing tenure. There are different tenures. We look at different aspects of this. But social housing and affordable housing is the issue where the stress is most felt. I think I should mention equality in terms of all of that. In the past, we've had discussions over, nearly, this is discrimination, that's discrimination. I think if equality is built into it, this does affect right across the board. I'm not standing here just as a Republican or a nationalist saying about this particular area of North Belfast. But if we have equality settled to that, to sort of make sure that there's no discrimination on whatever basis that might be, I think it's another thing that maybe the Minister would be looking at in terms of that, because we need to eliminate any type of discrimination. I want to praise co-ownership, and maybe that needs expanded. It has allowed people who would never be able to get into the mortgage, and especially at the moment, it gives them an opportunity to get in there and makes a big difference to their lives. I think Carál mentioned about a particular example, but there are many examples of the type of rents that are now being paid, and they're unbelievable. And co-ownership allows people to avoid the huge private rents, and in those circumstances. And as I said earlier, of course, the problem is much wider. But if you look at ring fencing, I know ring fencing is sort of one of these things which people use a lot, and all ministers start panicking because it's very hard to get ring fencing. But the type of ring fencing we're talking about here is in the areas which are most in need. If there is a budget, so ring fence a part of the budget for that, I think maybe it's another thing you might look at in terms of that. So the whole thing is, of course, is to have a budget to build houses and reduce the housing stress. And that's what the whole conversation is about here. There was a number of things mentioned, and this has come up time and time again. It never seems to get anywhere. Investing is one of them. I know investing is quite a hard negotiation, because it normally involves negotiation. But again, go back to the fact that we have public land, and what way to use that. If I could mention just alongside that, and I think it was Nuala who mentioned the idea of, it's also about refurbishment. It's also about the maintenance, and the examples that have been given by other MLAs here, and there will be more of it. It's the biggest thing that comes into my office. I know that, housing, but maintenance as well, and that, and also when you're starting to deal with landlords. And again, I'm not attacking every landlord, but I can say there are some landlords and private properties where it is seeing young children and I've been in and out of houses and flats and all of that where young children and the mould is on the wall. I've seen people trying to paint over it, and then you come back again in 6 months or a year, and the problem's still there. So I think accountability is maybe something else to look at. And also downsizing, and I say that as a person of my age, there's a lot of people when everybody's out of the nest, they want to downsize, and they actually go to the housing executive and say, I want to downsize. So it's giving them having an attention to the appropriate place for them to downsize to. And if I could go back a wee bit in history, and it used to appall me around interfaces, that there was a habit of putting, when you had problem tenants, move them out of somewhere where they should have been moved out of, but then concentrate them in. And many a time you landed into an interface, you didn't know how it started, but then you found out there was a drink house and there was all of that. So for people who are shifting down, to look at the appropriateness of where they're shifting to, because I think it works on the basis that the housing executive doesn't approach them, they approach the housing executive. They're trying to do, if you like, something to help the housing situation, and so there should be a wee bit maybe extra thought given to wherever they might move to. So if you're going to the over 55s project, that it is an over 55s project, because that's what they're looking for. And I'll finish off to go back to the tower blocks were mentioned again, and I have to say that especially after Grenfell and around the blocks in New Lodge, there was quite a number of meetings there.
The member bring his remarks to a close.
Well, indeed, the danger there, so just keep an eye on that. And the last thing, just mentioning Grenfell, and I don't know if it's within your bailiwick, but certainly there's a debate on because of the Victoria flats or apartments, that the 6 years is clearly not enough in terms of accountability for buildings, and I think we need to look at that. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. I call Brian Kingston.
Sir, Deputy Speaker, and as others have said, I welcome this debate being brought forward, and I thank the member for bringing that forward on North Belfast housing. And I think all 5 MLAs from North Belfast have agreed that this is the number one issue that they deal with in terms of the number of requests coming to their constituency offices, people who are seeking us to help push their case for social housing, or if they require repairs to social housing. Also people in private tenancies, which again needs a bit more work through the council to make improvements to those properties, or if they're being threatened with eviction and are in crisis that way. And just the ongoing work we all do in trying to see derelict and housing opportunity sites developed, which typically takes years of work to bring a successful outcome. And closely associated with that housing work is the work on the environment, on alleyways, areas where there's dumping, areas that aren't being well maintained, maybe weren't planned for proper maintenance at the start. So I would say, first of all, the good news is that demand is increasing in North Belfast, and it's good that that is the case. It would be good, though, if that resulted in more social housing sites being brought forward, and that is a frustration we have, that where that demand is increased, we don't see the increase in the number of sites. And it just means that more people are frustrated and disappointed and asking us to lobby for them to help them get social housing. I can remember the times when people could get a social house in Greater Shankill or North Belfast with less than 50 points, and certainly you would need typically 150 plus to have any chance now. So, as I say, we are constantly working with the housing executive, with the department, with housing associations and with private developers to see those sites brought forward. There are always complications along the way, but that work continues. Yesterday's debate about the water infrastructure is obviously very relevant to this, and that's usually one of the main stumbling hurdles. And the developers being told they have to build extra pipeworks to make the connections to the storm drains or to the sewage system, and to keep the two systems separate, and adding six-figure sums onto developments, and making some small developments not unviable. And this issue will not go away for us as an assembly. It's something that we're going to have to address, the need to invest in the wastewater system, and finding a way to fund that which will actually address the problem. As the Minister may be aware, in the Greater Shankill area there are a lobby group set up the BUILD project, which has mapped the number of derelict and housing opportunity sites, as I call them, in that area, and over 70 viable sites that they have developed, some in private ownership, some in statutory ownership with either the Department for Communities or the Education Authority or other government bodies. And my colleagues and I have been working with the BUILD group to push statutory bodies, meeting at a senior level with the Housing Executive, the Department for Communities and Belfast City Council, and asking for a coordinated strategic plan to bring forward those sites. And I sometimes hear in other areas where residents and communities are opposing social housing, and certainly that's not the experience in North Belfast. People want to see developments taking place, and we would urge the Department to work where there is that willingness and see sites brought forward. I would agree with the comments about co-ownership. We have seen private developments which in some areas the market wasn't strong and developers were sitting on their land, but we are now seeing sites moving forward, and in some of those areas maybe a third of the houses being sold through co-ownership. And I agree that it provides a path into home ownership for people who otherwise the level of either deposit or the mortgage interest rates would be prohibitive for them. And a very strong supporter of the co-ownership scheme, and it is making that path possible for people. I would want to mention one particular area which has opportunity sites, which is Glencairn, which is with Forth River Ward now moving into North Belfast, certainly has opportunity sites, and it's very much in need of a village plan. And as the Minister may know, through the City Council we have most of the funding needed for a community facility at the heart of Glencairn. There is a need for remainder funding to make that, to cover the costs of that. But the area is crying out for a proper village plan, and it has the opportunity sites within it to make that viable. I also want to speak positively, as my colleague did, about building successful communities, which was an initiative of our former member of this council, former minister from my party, which recognised that always waiting for the waiting list to grow in certain areas to justify a development was a negative cycle, and there was a need to break that by putting in some new housing into an area. And it has been very successful in Lower Shankill and Tigers Bay, and I know it also operated in Lower Old Park. And the actual work in Lower Shankill is continuing, and as well as housing, there's also been with the new walkway and improvements to some publicly owned and privately owned sites with clawbacks in place. So it has made a significant difference in those disadvantaged areas. My colleague mentioned about the Housing Executive staff, that they do work hard, and we need vacancies in those public-facing positions to be filled. I would also mention in North Belfast we do have a number of interfaces in places that is like a patchwork quilt. Some people would almost try to deny that there are issues there, but there are. And even though we would say there's been a great improvement in those areas, things can flare up, and those issues need to be managed well. So thank the Minister for his attendance today. Thank the member opposite for bringing this adjournment debate, and look forward to the Minister's contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. That completes the list of speakers. I now call on the Minister to respond to the Minister's comments.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to take this opportunity to thank the member for bringing the debate to the House, and I welcome the opportunity to respond to it. I think this is the first adjournment debate for a number of members in the House today. It's the first time outside of question time that I've spoken in this place as Communities Minister, and I'm really pleased that we are having the opportunity to talk about this issue, because I recognise many of the issues and concerns that the member and others have raised around housing in North Belfast. The reality, of course, is that many of these issues are replicated right throughout the country, but I do recognise it is particularly acute in North Belfast. And these issues are many. Issues such as the demand for social homes and increasing waiting lists, the availability and cost of private rented homes, growing homelessness pressures, the difficulty of delivering the necessary infrastructure and finding suitable land to provide new homes, and ensuring quality and safety of existing homes as well. And as Minister for Housing, I know that these issues and concerns aren't just faced in one constituency. They exist in our cities and our towns, urban and rural, and there is a need and demand for good, quality, affordable and sustainable homes that currently isn't being met. Housing in all places is a priority for me, and it should be a priority right across the executive. For this reason, housing must be considered as a whole system, and there must be a collective commitment and action across government alongside private, voluntary and community sector partners. Now, the barriers are well rehearsed. Right now, thousands of homes are not being built because of limitations on water infrastructure. Getting suitable land can be difficult. The planning process can significantly impact on delivery. And as a result, thousands of people are struggling to find a suitable home, and it is a problem that unfortunately is only getting worse. And we cannot end up like Dublin or London, where the failures of housing supply mean that economic growth only benefits the property owning few. Places where people with very good jobs struggle to put roofs over their heads, never mind their own home. Now, removing these barriers require coordinated action and investment across the executive, otherwise they will only squeeze housing supply further, and this has to be an executive that delivers, and that means focusing on what is important, and I believe one of those things is providing homes for our people. And the whole system approach is fundamental to the draft housing supply strategy that I'm currently working on, and this strategy will provide the framework to help bring about the system changes that we need, and I will prioritise getting this much needed strategy into place. But we have to be clear, this will only work if we have buy-in from other departments that prioritise the changes that we need to make in order to deliver the homes that we need. My second priority is to deliver more social homes. We need more social houses. The year before last, we started 1,950 homes. In the last financial year, over 1,500 homes were started in partnership with the Housing Executive and housing associations. Now, I'm pleased that the target was met, but 1,500 homes is not enough. We need to protect the social homes that we have and start about 2,500 houses a year. And I commit now to keep building more homes where they are needed, and despite all of the other financial pressures, I will continue to spend most of my capital budget on new social homes. I want us to be able to be in a position where we're building 35,000 more homes over the next 15 years. And over the next few years, I will put the foundations of that ambitious programme into place, working to increase the rate at which we are building them. The commitment to social home delivery can be seen in North Belfast over the next 3 years in the constituency. 809 social housing units are programmed to start as part of the social housing development programme. And my third priority is to take action to protect the housing executive so that it can continue to provide decent homes for our households and families. Sometimes I think that this issue has been talked about for so long that people forget how important it is, or maybe the numbers seem so big, or the housing executive seems such an integral part of our lives that we can't get our heads around the very real danger that it might feel. And given the current state of its homes and rental income, the housing executive has warned that some of its homes might become unfit for people to live in, and we cannot accept a decline in the quality and quantity of our social housing. That would be catastrophic for our communities, for our towns and cities, but most importantly, catastrophic for tens of thousands of people who will never be able to get a social home. So I want to prioritise finding a solution that will place the housing executive on a sustainable financial footing, and getting this done is really important for me, and this will enable additional much needed investment to improve the quality and to enhance the energy efficiency of the housing executive's homes. An example of driving such innovation forward can be seen already in North Belfast, where the housing executive is building 6 semi-detached homes at Sunningdale Gardens as part of a pilot, and these will really help in terms of lower heating bills, savings from reduced fuel costs and more comfortable homes. The next issue that I want to address is to improve the response to homelessness. This sector is under significant strain, manifested by the rapid increase in the need for temporary accommodation. I want to make sure that homelessness is rare, brief and non-recurrent. I want to support a shift to prevention, but we do have an immediate issue with the use of temporary accommodation, and this is money not being spent on homelessness prevention or supported housing schemes. And staying in insecure temporary accommodation is not good enough for families and puts them, especially children, under huge strain and pressure. Now, it will take time to achieve these ambitions, so our short-term focus must be continuing to support those currently in crisis. And I just want to mention the Supporting People scheme. High-quality, effective housing support can make a real difference to people's lives, enabling them to live more independently in the community. And I've been out and about and I've seen some fantastic examples of the difference that that support can make in people's lives, and that's why I made the decision last month to approve an additional £3 million in funding for the programme for the financial year, and this additional funding is an acknowledgement of the need that does exist within our society. I want to turn now just to some of the comments that members have made in the couple of minutes that I have left. First of all, Ms Nicol has asked me to be the advocate for housing need, and I hope that I have to some point demonstrated that I understand and am determined to resolve some of these issues to make sure that we do not find ourselves in the position that others do. And I think she highlighted very clearly the issue that we find ourselves in, with a demand of 4,400 in the last financial year and 655 new homes built. And she's absolutely right to highlight the fact that local development plans will play an important part. But I think it is essential that we do take a whole of government and a holistic approach to this to make sure that essentially we are making it easier for people to get the land and to build new homes on that. Mr. Brett talked about ambition, and I think that is really important, that we are ambitious in this area, because the demand and the need is so great. He also raised the issue of the parties that are absent today, and I'll not go into that in too much detail, other than to say that I think it is surprising there are so many parties that have not turned up to take part in this debate, which is so important, not just in this constituency, but right across Northern Ireland. I do agree with what he has said in relation to intimidation points and the need for that to be reviewed. I'll be receiving the report and research on that, and I have great sympathy with the points that he has made, as well as the issues that he has raised in relation to tower blocks as well. When we're under such housing need, it doesn't make sense for us to remove so many potential homes for people if we're not in a position to replace them. So of course we will be considering that issue. The member, Ms McAllister, was absolutely right to raise the anti-poverty strategy. It is an important issue as well, and the issues that she raises around derelict buildings will be part of the overall housing supply strategy as well. So we have to make sure that we can build new homes, but that we also look at the homes that are in existence and making sure that we can bring them up to an appropriate standard. Mr. Kelly had talked about identifying land. We are looking at land that the department holds, but not only land that the department holds, but that other public lands that exist as well, so that we can make the most of that. In terms of co-ownership, one of the first things that I did was to raise the co-ownership limit in Northern Ireland, and I will have more to say in the coming days on the building safety issues that he has raised as well. agree with a number of the comments that Mr Kingston has raised, which others had raised as well, and it is important that we see more social housing sites being brought forward so that we can make sure that we're addressing this issue by having the land and making sure that we're able to build on that as well. So just in closing, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm committed to a genuinely ambitious and strategic programme of work that will actually deliver results for people. I will need support from executive colleagues in order to do that, but I'm not here to tinker around the edges. I want to see thousands more affordable homes being built and lived in over the next 3 years, and I hope that I will have support of other parties to do that. Thank you.
Minister, thank you for that response. And thank you, members. The Assembly is adjourned.